Imagine being so rich that money would never be a problem again, but still feeling that everything around you is fake. That's exactly how Michael Harrison felt. A billionaire tired of rehearsed smiles and bought love. One day, seized by a bold idea, he decided to do something nobody expected. He gave an unlimited credit card to 3 women who were part of his life: his girlfriend, his assistant, and the housekeeper. He wanted to discover who really loved him, who was sincere when money was no longer an obstacle. But what he never imagined is that precisely the most ignored woman in the house, the young obese woman who cleaned the corners in silence, would be the one capable of touching his heart in a way that no money could buy. Michael Harrison was the type of man the world tends to admire and, at the same time, envy. A billionaire, owner of companies that stretched across multiple countries, accustomed to dinners with politicians and celebrities, he lived surrounded by people, but inside him there was a silence that nobody seemed to hear. Sometimes he looked out the window of his penthouse and saw the city pulsing down below, the hurried cars, the blinking lights, the noise of real life, and wondered at what point his own existence had become so mechanical. It was curious. The more money he accumulated, the less sincerity he saw around him. People seemed to approach him like bees seeking honey, not as human beings seeking affection. He noticed it in the subtle gestures, in the disguised looks, in the rush with which everyone laughed at his jokes, even when they weren't funny at all. On the outside, a powerful man. On the inside, a tired heart, exhausted from feeling used. It was on one of those sleepless nights, with a glass of whiskey in his hand and his mind full of doubts, that he had an idea as simple as it was bold: to test the love and loyalty of the people around him. After all, money buys many things: comfort, admiration, status, but will never buy what really matters: the truth. When reflecting on who would be chosen for this curious experiment, Michael thought about the 3 women who surrounded him most. Jessica, his girlfriend, was the first who came to mind. Young, beautiful, with a charming smile and striking presence. From the beginning, she seemed in love, but there was something in her gestures that made him uneasy, an excessive attachment to brands, to events, to appearances. Then there was Amanda, his personal assistant. Intelligent, practical, extremely competent. She always knew what to say and how to solve any situation. Michael admired her dedication, but also noticed her silent ambition, that desire to climb in life at any cost, even if it meant stepping over someone. And finally, there was Sarah, the most invisible of all, the housekeeper, young, obese and shy, always walking with her head down through the mansion's hallways. While the other 2 competed for attention, Sarah hid behind her apron and silence. She almost never looked him in the eyes, and yet Michael felt something different when she was around. It was hard to explain, but there was a peace in her simple gestures, the way she placed fresh flowers in the living room, the care in keeping everything in order without ever expecting recognition. She didn't seem driven by interest, only by genuine kindness. And perhaps that was precisely what sparked his curiosity. Why could someone so ignored transmit so much lightness in an environment so full of vanities? Then, on a seemingly ordinary morning, Michael woke up decided. He was going to put the character of these 3 women to the test, without any of them knowing about the test. He had 3 identical credit cards prepared, each with unlimited access to his fortune. The plan was simple: give one to each of them and observe what they would do with so much power in their hands. No rules, no explanation. He wanted to see the essence of each one without interfering, without prior judgments. For many, that would sound like madness. After all, who in their right mind would give away such freedom without guarantees? But Michael knew what he was doing. His goal wasn't to measure spending, but to measure souls. Money, he thought, is the most faithful mirror of human character. It amplifies what already exists within the person. If there's goodness, it flourishes. If there's greed, it overflows. As he observed the cards on the desk, he felt a slight shiver, as if sensing that this time something much bigger was about to happen. He just didn't imagine that, at the end of this test, it would be precisely the simplest and most invisible woman who would reveal the rarest and most valuable power of all, the purity of a true heart. Michael knew that, in a world dominated by appearances, testing people's hearts was almost heresy. But he was willing to take that risk. For years, he had trusted smiles that proved false, in hugs that hid intentions, and in words that, in the end, were nothing but masks. He was deceived by partners, betrayed by friends, and, perhaps most painful, loved out of convenience. The loneliness of a rich man is not made of physical absence, but of empty presences. That's why, when he decided to give the unlimited card to the three women, his true goal wasn't to measure who would spend more or less. It was to discover who would keep their soul clean when the power of money was within reach of their hands. He wanted to see who would be capable of resisting temptation, who would keep their heart aligned with truth when nobody was watching. It was a silent character test, disguised as generosity, but which for him meant much more. It was the last attempt to believe in people. Because, deep down, Michael didn't just want to test. He wanted to be surprised. The billionaire believed that money, when given to someone, has the power to reveal what words hide. It's like a magnifying glass on character. And he knew, from personal experience, that money corrupts the weak but elevates the strong. This idea guided him, but also scared him. How many times had he himself been a prisoner of his own luxury? How many times did he catch himself judging someone by what they wore or by the car they drove? The experiment was, in part, a test with three women, but also a mirror for himself. Perhaps, without realizing it, Michael was searching for something he lost long ago: simplicity, the ability to trust without distrusting, to give without expecting anything in return. And it's curious how life has its own way of teaching. Sometimes, when we want to measure others, the universe puts us face to face with our own essence. He just didn't imagine that the lesson would come from where he least expected. Not from the powerful women who crossed his path, but from a young, obese, and silent woman that nobody noticed, and who carried within herself a nobility that no diploma or status could teach. Deep down, Michael desired something that money would never be able to buy: emotional truth. He wanted to discover there were still people who valued gestures, not figures, who saw the human being, not the bank balance. And, perhaps for that reason, this experiment was so important. He knew that each choice made with that card would be a confession, a faithful portrait of who each of them was when there were no limits. What he didn't imagine was how much this would affect him emotionally. There would be moments when he would feel betrayed, others when he would be genuinely surprised, and, above all, a specific instant when his heart would be touched in a way he had never felt before. But before getting there, he would need to observe patiently the unfolding of attitudes. And it would be precisely in the smallest decisions, in the almost imperceptible gestures, that the truth would begin to reveal itself. Jessica received the card like someone receiving a crown. Her eyes shone with a mixture of surprise and euphoria that Michael would never forget. "No limits?" she asked, almost unable to believe it. He only confirmed with slight nod, observing in silence the way her face lit up more from the idea of power than from the gesture itself. As soon as she left the office, Michael realized that the test had already begun. In the following days, Jessica's behavior transformed completely. The previously silent mornings were replaced by frantic calls to stylists, fashion consultants, and travel agencies. Extremely expensive clothes began to arrive in huge boxes, coming from all parts of the world. Shoes, bags, jewelry, everything she said she didn't need, suddenly became indispensable. Jessica believed that luxury was the purest form of love, and that spending was a way to prove she was happy. But what she didn't realize was that, little by little, the card wasn't just buying objects, it was buying her own vanity. Michael watched everything from afar, without interfering. Each new purchase was like a window into Jessica's soul. He remembered the conversations from the beginning of their relationship, when she said that what mattered was true love, and how those words now seemed distant, almost laughable. The house filled with bags, fragrances, dresses, and boxes that barely got opened before being replaced by even more expensive ones. It was as if her internal emptiness was an impossible hole to fill, and each purchase was just a desperate attempt to hide what was missing. Ostentation became routine. Photos at luxurious dinners, stories showing exotic trips, captions with inspirational phrases, but everything was nothing but performance. Michael, deep inside, knew money doesn't change people, it only reveals what was always in them. And what he saw now was a woman molded by the desire to be admired, not loved, a bitter reflection of the world he himself had helped build. As the days passed, Jessica completely lost her sense of limits. She saw the card as a passport to a new status, not as a responsibility. She began to frequent exclusive parties, to be photographed next to influencers and businessmen, as if the value of her companions measured her own value. Michael watched everything with a mixture of sadness and resignation. On one hand, he already expected that result. On the other, he still held a foolish hope that at some point she would surprise him. But true love isn't measured by the amount of zeros in the account, but by the ability to see the other when the lights go out. Jessica, unfortunately, no longer saw anyone beyond her own reflection in the shop windows she frequented, and, without realizing it, she was digging the distance between them with each purchase, each party, each rehearsed smile. Little did she know that, while she was getting lost among sparkles and champagnes, another woman, invisible, discreet, and obese, was beginning to write in silence the most beautiful part of this story. Amanda had always been a woman with a firm gaze and calculated words. When Michael gave her the unlimited credit card, she didn't react with the same dazzlement as Jessica. Her face remained serene, almost cold, like someone receiving a mission, not a gift. She thanked him with a contained smile and returned to her desk as if nothing had happened. But inside her, something ignited. She saw that card not as an opportunity to spend, but as a tool to approach a world she had always desired. Amanda believed that life was a game of positions and that intelligence was worth more than appearance. But now, with money at her disposal, she realized she could unite both things. She started subtly, discreet clothes but designer, expensive perfumes that transmitted power, tickets to corporate events where the big names in the market gathered. Everything very planned. She didn't want to show off. She wanted to conquer. And, to the eyes of those who didn't pay attention, she seemed to only be improving her professional image. Michael, however, saw beyond. He knew that calculated behavior hid a silent ambition, as dangerous as Jessica's exhibitionism. As the days passed, Amanda's behavior became increasingly strategic. She began to attend meetings she previously didn't have access to, made contact with investors, dined with executives, and began to be noticed by influential people. It was a subtle but constant ascent. Each of her steps seemed rehearsed to perfection. Amanda didn't spend impulsively. Each purchase was an investment, each event an opportunity. And, in a way, she really believed she was being rational. Deep down, she saw Michael's experiment as a chance to show her value, to prove that she could be by his side not just as an assistant, but as an equal. The problem is that, in trying to prove that, she crossed an invisible line. She began to mold her identity around ambition. She became so focused on growing that she forgot the reason why she worked for Michael in the first place. It was no longer about loyalty or gratitude, but about power. She began to believe that, if she played her cards right, one day she could replace the boss himself. Michael observed everything in silence, without judging, but with growing sadness. It was painful to see someone intelligent use their own mind to distance themselves from what is human. While Jessica sank into luxury and Amanda got lost in strategies, Michael was beginning to understand the depth of his experiment. Money didn't just reveal who people were. It amplified their shadows. Jessica represented immediate vanity, Amanda, cold ambition. And what both had in common was the inability to look beyond themselves. Neither of them realized that behind that gesture of the card, there was a man trying to rediscover faith in humanity. They only saw an opportunity, not a test. But Michael still hadn't given up. He knew that someone was missing, the third piece of the puzzle, the one that seemed least important, but who, ironically, carried the greatest power of all, the ability to act with the heart. While he watched Amanda climb socially, he began to wonder what Sarah was doing with the card she received. After all, she never mentioned anything, never bragged, never commented on a single purchase. It was as if that gift had no meaning to her at all. Little did he know that, in the shadows of the mansion, far from the spotlights, the young obese woman was writing a chapter that would forever change the fate of all three. Sarah had always been the type of person who went unnoticed, even though she was right there, before everyone's eyes. She had worked at the mansion for 3 years, but if anyone asked her name to Michael's guests, hardly anyone would know how to answer. She was a girl who served coffee, who left the sheets impeccably folded, and who cleaned the corners of the house with an almost poetic delicacy. But behind the apron and the timid eyes, there was a sensitive soul, loaded with dreams she never dared tell anyone. Since childhood, Sarah knew what it was to be judged. Her appearance, the obese body, the simple clothes, the insecure gestures, had always been a reason for ugly looks and veiled laughter. And even so, she never let resentment settle in her heart. Perhaps because she understood, better than anyone, that other people's meanness speaks more about them than about us. In that house full of luxury, she was the only one who still knew the way to humility and the value of small things. When Michael called her to the office to give her the card, Sarah almost didn't know what to say. She thought it was some mistake. "Sir, are you sure?" she asked, holding the envelope with trembling hands. Michael just smiled and answered yes, that she could use the card as she wished, without restrictions. Sarah, not understanding the reason, thanked him timidly and left, keeping the gift in the pocket of her uniform, like someone carrying something sacred. For days, the card remained forgotten in a drawer in her room. She was afraid to use it. The simple fact of possessing something so valuable already made her uncomfortable. She didn't know what to buy, nor did she see any sense in spending on superfluous things. After all, she already had everything she considered necessary: a stable job, a roof over her head, and the satisfaction of helping those who needed it. At night, while she watched through the window the lights of New York blinking in the distance, Sarah wondered why someone like her would have received such a generous gift. There was something in that gesture that seemed more like an enigma than a prize. In the mansion's hallways, nobody paid attention to Sarah. Jessica and Amanda barely noticed that she had also received a card. For them, the young obese woman represented no threat at all. She was just a maid, invisible, harmless. But Michael, even if he didn't admit it, had a different look. There was something in the way she moved, in the sweetness with which she treated everyone, that made him feel a strange tranquility. Sarah never asked for anything, never complained, and perhaps that's why it was so easy to forget her. But what nobody imagined was that inside her, a silent generosity dwelled, ready to flourish at the right moment. And while the other two women plunged into luxury and ambition, Sarah was about to show, with simple gestures and unexpected choices, that the true value of a person isn't in how much they have, but in how much they're capable of giving, even when there's almost nothing left. When Sarah finally decided to use a card, nobody could imagine what would happen. Unlike Jessica, who spent out of vanity, or Amanda, who bought strategically, Sarah thought carefully about each action. There was no rush, no desire to impress anyone. First, she paid for medicines for elderly people who lived alone in the neighborhood, people who didn't have the means to afford simple treatments, but whose happiness depended on small gestures. Each delivery made by Sarah was silent, almost secret, but carried an emotional intensity that transformed the act into something much bigger than money. She bought food for needy families, often leaving them at the door, never being seen, and allocated part of the amount of orphanages that received minimal attention from governments and institutions. Each gesture was made with love, humility, and a deep understanding of life that few people possessed. It was as if the world had given her not just a card, but an opportunity to spread kindness without limits. In the days that followed, Michael began to notice small changes, not in the newspapers or on social media, where Jessica and Amanda displayed their purchases and conquests, but in the little news that reached him through others: doctors talking about paid medicines, neighbors mentioning delivered food baskets, children smiling when receiving new clothes. And little by little, a feeling of astonishment began to grow inside him. It was as if he were witnessing a series of invisible actions, performed by a woman that nobody paid attention to, but who carried within herself something rare: the ability to see the other as a human being. While the other two sought status, recognition, and power, Sarah practiced the purest form of empathy. Each of her gestures seemed to whisper a message that Michael had never heard before: that true greatness isn't in accumulated wealth, but in the heart that knows how to care. What impressed Michael most was the naturalness with which Sarah acted. She never commented with anyone about what she did, nor did she seek applause or thanks. Each cent spent had a purpose that only she understood, and each action carried a human value that no figure could measure. In his mind, Michael began perceiving uncomfortable but liberating truth. Money, which had always surrounded him with false people, would never be able to buy something that Sarah had in abundance: kindness, compassion, and authenticity. He began to feel touched in a way that hadn't happened in years, as if life were finally showing him what really matters. And in that instant, Michael knew that the young obese woman, whom everyone ignored, would be the axis of a greater lesson about love, humanity, and true wealth. But there was still the need to observe how this difference in character would manifest itself before the other two women, and what each choice, each gesture, would reveal about them. Michael began to notice the difference between the three women in a way he had never imagined. While Jessica flaunted her purchases and Amanda consolidated her social ascent, Sarah continued invisible to everyone's eyes, but her presence was undeniably more striking. He realized that the card, which could be just another status symbol, was revealing who really had a soul. Each silent gesture of Sarah carried a force that no ostentation could overcome. Michael found himself reflecting on his own choices, and how many times he judged people only by appearance or by what they possessed. And it was precisely that reflection that made him feel a mixture of admiration and astonishment. The young obese woman, always shy, whom he had never truly valued, was showing what nobody else could: a purity of heart that translated into concrete, disinterested and generous actions. With each new act of kindness, Michael felt his heart open gradually, almost painfully. It wasn't just surprise at Sarah's attitude, but the profound impact that simplicity carried. He began to perceive that life, with all its complexity, frequently confuses appearance with essence, and that many times we miss opportunities to recognize true greatness because it doesn't come accompanied by sparkles or titles. Sarah didn't need parties or jewelry to stand out. Her greatness was silent, discreet, but penetrating. Each medicine bought, each basket delivered, each gesture of attention to someone forgotten or ignored in society was like a light turned on in an environment where everything seemed cold and calculated. Michael felt, for the first time in a long time, that true wealth wasn't in bank accounts or million-dollar contracts, but in the ability to do good without expecting recognition. While observing the differences between them, Michael began to mentally plan how the end of this experiment would be revealed. He knew that Jessica and Amanda would never understand the impact of Sarah's actions. They were trapped in their own desires, each with their way of seeking approval. But Sarah, with her humility and compassion, had already shown the most important lesson: that character and empathy are more valuable than any fortune. Michael still hadn't decided the exact moment to confront the other two, but he knew that the encounter with Sarah would be different. He felt that something profound was about to happen, something capable of moving his most intimate feelings, that would remind him of what really matters in life. Little could he imagine that the young obese woman, whom everyone judged insignificant, would be the key to a personal transformation he never sought, but needed to experience to understand that love, respect, and kindness are treasures that cannot be bought, only cultivated. Michael finally decided to act. He called Jessica and Amanda to his office, with a soft afternoon light illuminated just enough to create an atmosphere of sincerity and introspection. He didn't begin with accusations. Instead, he spoke calmly, letting each word resonate reflectively. First, he questioned the reason for each purchase, the purpose of each gesture. Jessica, initially surprised, tried to justify her spending on clothes, jewelry, and parties, claiming they were demonstrations of love and joy. Michael listened patiently, but inside, he felt a mixture of disappointment and resignation. Each of her arguments only seemed to reinforce the superficiality of her worldview, showing that for Jessica, money was synonymous with status, and that her affection was intimately linked to what she could get from him. The conversation flowed, and Michael let her expose her thoughts completely, knowing that only her own speech would reveal the truth. It was a silent but deep examination, and he was attentive to every gesture, every hesitation, every nuance of sincerity that might emerge. Next came the moment to speak with Amanda. She maintained her firm, controlled posture, trying to demonstrate rationality and intelligence in each response. She reported the event she attended, the contacts she made, and how each action was planned to optimize opportunities. Michael listened, but his gaze wasn't one of judgment. It was one of understanding and sadness at the same time. He was beginning to clearly see the pattern of behavior. Both were seeking something that wasn't love or genuine friendship, but a form of self-benefit, whether through the pleasure of consumption or through the ambition of social growth. Each of Amanda's words, though carefully chosen, sounded cold and distant. Michael felt a glaring difference between those actions and what he knew Sarah had done in silence. While Jessica and Amanda showed interest in themselves, Sarah demonstrated interest in the world around her, in others, in forgotten and invisible people, and that in Michael's eyes was more valuable than all the jewels and contacts that could exist on the entire planet. At the end of the confrontation, Michael didn't need to raise his voice. The truth spoke for itself. He revealed that the entire experiment was done to observe the essence of each one, to understand who really cares without material or social motivation. Jessica remained in shock, unable to comprehend how her excess ostentation had become proof of selfishness. Amanda, for her part, maintained her composure, but her gaze no longer hid the frustration and awareness that her plan had been uncovered. Michael made it clear that what he sought wasn't luxury, but character. It wasn't ambition, but empathy. The words floated in the air like a silent blade, cutting through any illusion that still existed. And while disappointment with the two women settled in, Michael felt a silent anticipation about what Sarah would do next. He still didn't know the depth of the impact that the young obese woman would have on his life, but he already felt that the heart of the story had not yet been completely revealed. Something was about to happen, and it would be in that instant that the true lesson would become impossible to ignore. After the confrontation with Jessica and Amanda, Michael felt a mixture of relief and expectation. He knew that the most important lesson had not yet been revealed, and his heart yearned for the moment when Sarah would enter the scene. He called her to his office, but this time with a different feeling. There was no test, no disguised curiosity, only a genuine desire to understand that woman everyone underestimated. When Sarah entered, timid, with lowered gaze and slightly trembling hands, Michael realized that nothing in the world could prepare him for the impact of what he was about to discover. She didn't need to say anything. Each gesture, each contained smile, each soft breath revealed sincerity he had never found in any other person. The young obese woman, invisible to society's eyes and ignored by the ostentation of the other women, now became the protagonist of a story that would transcend money, status, and power. While talking with her, Michael began to perceive the depth of Sarah's goodness. He asked about her choices with the card, and she responded naturally, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. She told about the medicines bought, the baskets delivered, the families helped, and the orphanages that received unexpected attention. There was no vanity in her words, no interest in standing out. Each gesture was made with love, humility, and genuine compassion. Michael felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. A pure, almost childlike emotion, capable of touching the soul inescapably. He remembered how many times he sought truth amid falsehood, and now he found before him, in a woman nobody had valued. That moment was more than a lesson about character. It was a revelation about the essence of love and humanity. As the conversation continued, Michael perceived that Sarah possessed something no wealth could buy: authenticity. The beauty that emanated from her didn't come from appearance or any standard imposed by society, but from the purity of her heart, from the care for others, and from the ability to give without expecting anything in return. He felt an immediate and deep connection, as if he had finally found what he was looking for amid so many deceits and superficialities. What before went unnoticed now became the brightest light of his life. And, although the story was not yet completely concluded, Michael knew he had found something rare and precious, a genuine love that flourished precisely in the heart of the young obese woman everyone ignored. Expectation hung in the air, and he could barely imagine how that discovery would forever transform his way of seeing the world, love, and true wealth. After all the tests and observations, Michael finally understood what money could never buy. He sat next to Sarah, looking into her eyes, and realized that what mattered wasn't appearance, luxury, or power, but the essence of each person. While Jessica and Amanda got lost in vanity and ambition, Sarah showed that kindness and compassion were infinitely more valuable. Each silent gesture, each act of generosity, each decision made without expecting recognition, revealed a simple but powerful truth. True wealth resides in the heart. Michael felt an emotion so intense it almost made him cry, It wasn't the type of emotion that could be bought, but the one born from sincere admiration, from surprise at purity, and from gratitude for what is genuine. He finally realized that true love can arise where nobody expects it, and that humility can be more majestic than any ostentation. In his reflection, Michael perceived that Sarah, the young, obese, and shy woman, carried something he never found in women who seemed perfect in society's eyes. She had silent courage, deep empathy, and an authenticity that transformed each gesture into a life lesson. He realized that he spent years seeking someone who would love him for who he was, without noticing that he was surrounded by interested people, by superficial relationships, and by deceptive appearances. Sarah, with her simple way and generous heart, showed that the true value of a person isn't measured by clothes, parties, or contacts, but by the impact their actions have on others' lives. Michael finally understood that when someone acts with compassion and altruism, they create a type of wealth that no money can replace, a wealth that fills the spirit and transforms lives. In the end, Michael approached Sarah with respect, affection, and genuine emotion. He knew that the young obese woman, previously invisible to everyone's eyes, would become the most important person in his life, not just because of the love he felt, but because of the learning she provided. He understood that true wealth wasn't in bank accounts, properties, or power, but in kindness, in empathy, and in the ability to care about one's neighbor. Each of Sarah's gestures had broken his heart, not with sadness, but with admiration, and had taught him a lesson he would never forget. Michael realized that true love flourishes where there is sincerity, that appearances deceive, and that the heart of a person, even invisible and underestimated, can contain a treasure greater than any fortune. And, while contemplating Sarah, Michael knew that his life had changed forever, now guided by the certainty that kindness is the greatest patrimony anyone can possess. And now, think for a moment. How many times have you let yourself be carried away by appearances, judged someone by what they seem to have, or by what they showed, and missed opportunities to recognize real people? The story of Michael and Sarah reminds us that real wealth isn't in figures, cars, or designer clothes, but in generosity, in empathy, and in the genuine love we can offer and receive. Have you stopped to reflect on how you can apply this in your life? What simple, silent, and true gestures can you make today to transform someone's day, or even change your own perception of value? The world rewards those who act with heart, and life becomes lighter when we recognize the importance of what can't be measured in money. Now, think with me. Who have you been ignoring or underestimating because of appearances? Could a simple action of yours make a difference in that person's life? Just as Sarah changed Michael's story? Don't wait for grand gestures to come with applause or material rewards. Start small with sincerity and watch the impact grow. Real stories like this teach us that love and kindness are the greatest treasures we can cultivate, and their effect can be greater than any fortune. If this story inspired you, don't keep it just to yourself. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and keep following content that provokes reflection, awakens empathy, and shows how small attitudes can transform lives. And tell me in the comments, what gesture of kindness are you willing to make today? Who knows if you won't be the next Sarah in someone's life?